Her cook a week after she got here gave us notice.
Dick.
I'm sure he might not be in.
But unfortunately, he also told them he only wanted to be part-time.
I know.
So I get it.
I'm not actually thinking he's a dick, but for me, when she said she was trying to cook something, she had a meltdown.
So what you doing?
She was trying to learn, and she was in there trying to make a sauce, and she couldn't find something. And she said she wanted having a full-on temper tantrum, and fell to the floor and crying, and she was furious with Chris for leaving her. And so she said,
"That what an asshole!"
It's just because I sat.
Does she have anybody helping her or what? No.
No, she's got a part-time somebody. But
what about the golf course connection? Was that that didn't pan out? There was nobody else around.
What's Braden doing? Is he still cooking?
Oh,
I said no, he's not. But I'll pass it on.
You want to close my door? I think we're online. Thanks.
5 minutes.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Denise. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, you guys?
You bet.
Oh, that's too bad for you guys, hey? There, I finally figured it out today.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to this Committee of the Whole meeting for Friday, the 16th of February, 2024. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district, and today are located on the Tk'emlúps-te-Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps-te-Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. We have the minutes of the January 19th Committee of the Whole meeting.
Move the minutes.
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair Smith, seconded by Director Getz. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Online? Need to hear verbally, I'm afraid.
Yay.
Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Opposed? That's carried. We move straight into a report on the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library from Chief Librarian Judy Moore. Welcome, Ms. Moore, and the library staff.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Delighted to be here this morning. And just before I get started with my presentation, I would like to acknowledge my management team. So sitting right behind me is Margot Schiller. Margot, please stand. Margot is our manager of Kamloops Libraries and Engagement. And she's heading up our tiny library as part of her portfolio, and you'll be hearing much more about that. Melissa Lowenberg, our manager of community libraries and engagement. So she's responsible for everything outside of Kamloops. So that includes all the libraries, Merritt, and the smaller ones, as well as the mobile library. And Jenny Abramczyk, who's our manager of discovery and support services. And she manages all of the support and brings to our front lines everything that's needed. So whether it's our library materials, our website, anything that it takes to run our libraries is really Jenny's portfolio. So I'm delighted to have them all here. And sitting behind the three of them, are our HR advisors. So I'm to understand that this is their first board meeting. So we have Gabby and Heather. Super. So I'm going to take the opportunity and sit down. Chewing bubble gum and walking at the same time aren't some of my magical powers. So I'm just gonna leaf through my presentation. It's about 20 minutes, and there's some audio visual components to it as well. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for responding to the invitation. I know that many of you will be joining us at 1 o'clock for the Aberdeen Tiny Library grand opening. It's quite the occasion. It marks the first additional library to the Thompson-Nicola Regional District in 24 years here in Kamloops. So it's a big event for us. Our 353 square foot library certainly will pack a big punch. So, but before we get there, I'm going to highlight a number of our operational priorities that we're working on. I know during the training presentation that most of you attended, each of the departments provided to you operational priorities. Library is a big department. I think we've got about 20 operational priorities for 2024, but these are kind of our top 7 that I thought that you would be interested in hearing a little bit about. So first off, 50th anniversary, we are 50 years old. So you'll be hearing much more about that this year. Innovative technology, we'll touch briefly on those things. Mobile library stops, the Clearwater Library renovation. I'll provide you with an update on that. A newer initiative and something that we put some emphasis on in the fall was a review of our library hours of service here in Kamloops. The CSO program, which I am especially proud of in our partnership working with the city. We'll discuss that, and then we'll leave off with the tiny library and a little bit of a discussion around the South Kamloops Library. All right, so we're 50 years old. We're going to be really putting a focus on programming beginning in September. So while I guess as the crow flies or the clock ticks, we would have started that right in January. But instead, what we're going to do is dovetail this with our strategic planning. So the library is without a strategic plan. We had begun strategic planning in March of 2020. We can all remember March of 2020. So in earnest, we were working with a local consultant, JP Baker, and like everything, like all businesses, like everybody in community, we were into pandemic. So I think our last meeting was something like March the 14th. So it's time to resume strategic planning. And so our aim is to connect with all of our communities across the regional district. We will also be working with Corbin Kelly. I hope that Corbin will support us as we engage with First Nations in a much greater way than we have before through this effort. And also important is not just our patrons, but kind of the why. Why is it that we're not engaging everyone? So we want to put a special effort to reaching out even further into our communities. So we're going to dovetail those two things together. Of course, weather is not always on our side. So we're going to start at the furthest reaches. And I'm looking at Director across the room, Lee. Knowing that we'll start probably with Blue River and we'll work our way inwards with those efforts. Okay, I'm going to turn attention here to innovative technology, and 2024 is going to bring increased technology and improvements to our patrons and the way that we run our business on the library side. All right, so we've already begun adopting something that we call radio frequency identification at the TNRL. The jumping off point for this was Aberdeen Library, which you'll see and you'll experience. I'd like to pass along some RFID tags for you just to get a sense in terms of the future forward for us and all the data that we're actually capturing with these tags. And at the same time, I'm going to show you this very short video clip. It's from the Netherlands. Let's see here. Just take a look. Yep, very interesting. Tons of data stored on those tiny little tags there. Yeah, be very careful with those. Could do that too. At any rate, I thought it would be interesting for those of you interested in tech to see what an RFID tag looks like. There's an incredible amount of data that's actually stored on those. In the months to come, as we begin fully implementing this, you can leaf through our books and maybe play a little bit of a game on trying to find the RFID tag. That would be good fun. But it's an incredible enabler, that RFID. So how do I get to my next slide here? There we go. So what exactly are the benefits to us at the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library? Well, library materials will find their way to the shelves a whole lot quicker. If you imagine scanning a book, I'm going to take Jamie's folder here. You know, our motion has always been to, you know, have a reader. It reads the barcode. With radio frequency identification, we can literally have books stacked 10 high and simply pass it over a plate and it'll check books in, it'll check books out. So the kids are really digging it at Aberdeen Mall. Do have a try with that. One of the big added benefits is that because of the amount of materials handling we do at the library, it will relieve some of the issues that we may have encountered with staff with repetitive strain. It just, you know, this motion that staff are literally doing, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of times each day is really, really hard biomechanically. In this photo here, you'll see our tiny holds locker. It looks like a refrigeration unit. And those materials are all tagged with RFID. You can't really trick the holds locker. You think that you can, that you'll just, you know, put your card in and take your materials out and perhaps other patrons' materials out. Not so simple. I don't know if I'm explaining that as well as I ought. Jenny? Is that good? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like a refrigeration unit. That's the best way that I can explain that. So we will be implementing this across the system at all of our libraries by the end of 2024, and we will be assembling a team to do tagging on all of our items. So we're actually literally going to have to touch every single item that we have in our inventory in the library this year. In the next 2 months, we're going to be introducing our library app. So more 21st century stuff coming your way. And doing due diligence prior to, you know, deciding to head in this direction. We did do a bit of research, and it indicates that 80 to 90% of online time is actually spent on apps. So it's incumbent on us to be where people are and to have that convenience at people's fingertips. So literally from the app, people will be able to place holds, they'll be able to renew items, check due dates, see our events, which is fantastic. And it will also do push notifications. So you'll get a text message to indicate when you've got a hold in or perhaps are tardy with returning materials. It may indicate that that you've got to bring things back as well. So that's quite fantastic. So with that, of course, we'll be creating a big communications plan to ensure that we get widest information out to our public. In the future, it may mean also that people will be able to check out library materials right from the handheld. So not even use the self-check machines, but literally just use phones, iPhones, what have you, to check out library materials. Our mobile library, we're just turning attention onto that. So as part of our continual improvement cycle, the first quarter of 2024, we'll see a number of changes to the mobile library stops. So the mobile library will now stop at Sun Peaks and Whitecroft every Sunday for 3 hours. This is a significant change for us. We have a stop that we're introducing at Valley View that will tuck into our Kamloops stops, and they'll receive a visit every Wednesday. Tobiano is new, and it will see a stop once every 3 weeks. And the further change is that we've tweaked the schedule and the stop from Thompson Rivers Estates to the Big Bar Station gas bar. They had made this request to us quite some time ago, and we're delighted that we could actually make this change. And I will say that that group is over the moon. So I think that that will be well received. So we want to free up some of Melissa Lowenberg's time. She has been working really hard on some guerrilla marketing for our mobile library. In fact, I believe that she's gone to some automotive shops. She's been handing out flyers to, I think she's been spotted at Timmy's, talking to the guys having coffee. We are really challenged at this point to recruit for a temporary mobile library driver. So for those of you that know people that have their air brakes, clean driver's abstracts, we would love to hear from you. It's really, we're a little bit hamstrung not having that additional driver. So in your networks, if you're able to let people know that we are looking for an awesome library staff member to join our team to drive the mobile library, that would be much appreciated. Here we are, the Clearwater Library project. It's just out to design right now, and then we'll be into tendering in June, and we expect that renovations will take place over the summer. So before too long, we're going to get creative on how it is that we will best provide library services to the Clearwater residents during the closure. I know many of you were out to Clearwater for the out-of-town board meeting that showcased that library. We've received since that time lots of comments, and people are really excited to see the improvements to the library. Yeah, Melissa, do you have anything to add to any of those? No.
I think
she really does like spending the time in the automotive shops and Timmy's.
Are you going to keep that awesome clock at Clearwater Library with the book covers, each one with a different number that, you know, like Stephen King's, 4 past midnight was 4 o'clock? If Clearwater doesn't want it, I'm sure we can find room at the Ashcroft branch, just saying.
All right, Kamloops Libraries Hours Survey. So past fall, we did undertake surveys online, print, through social media, our website, and we were astounded. We received 700 survey results back. I think that that probably breaks a record for us on the library side. People really did want to engage with us and talk about what their aspirations are for the library services hours for Kamloops and the downtown Kamloops Library and for the North Shore. So just to give you some confidence in this process, we want to remain cost neutral. So we're not looking to drive costs. We're instead looking to just tweak our hours of operation and really look at kind of what the feedback was, which had to do an awful lot with year-round hours of service. I believe that patrons are confused. We have Sunday hours here seasonally. By the time we really get going in the spring, and people are aware that Sundays are open to the public, we close again. So the survey did strongly indicate a need and want for some year-round hours of service. So we're doing some further analysis of our data and doing some planning, and I anticipate coming forward to the board with recommendations within the next 2 months for approval, discussion and approval, hopefully. The CSO officer strategy. So we are really, really excited to be working with the city of Kamloops and piloting with them the CSO program at the North Kamloops Library. That's been in place since September of 2022. It was to be a year-long pilot, and we are currently in a month-to-month situation with them, but beginning to have discussions. For those of you that aren't entirely familiar with the community service officer position, those duties really are differentiated from general security guards in that their emphasis on training and development has an awful lot to do with understanding local community and supports. And that's where, you know, in terms of general security, when we have patrons who are vulnerable, we deal with a great number of vulnerable patrons each and every day, people who are seeking shelter, experiencing mental health issues, or perhaps are in need of social services support. They are that conduit. And so beyond you know, really their responsibility for guarding and for security, they extend that much further in their knowledge and understanding of community. So I think that for us at the North Kamloops Library, it's gone very, very well. So we are undertaking an evaluation, and we are working on determining what our next steps might be for this really fruitful pilot project. So just to speak to some of the numbers there, in the past 18 months since the CSOs have come on board, the environment at the North Kamloops Library has changed significantly, and it's significantly improved. Our incident in 2022, we experienced 85 incidents of inappropriate behavior at North Kamloops. And when we look at 2023, those numbers are down by 53%, in that we only had 45 incidents like that kind in 2023. So that's a big change for us. So we know that the CSOs working with us are doing just a great job. Our staff, they tell us that they're feeling much safer as well. And I think just overall, it's worth noting that I think it's a much more positive environment at the North Kamloops Library than what we've had before. Two, our visits to the North Kamloops Library are way up. So in 2023, we had 93,000 visits to that library, which is an increase of 12% over 2022. So a marked difference. So if you kind of reflect on the fact that we're actually getting busier, you might expect that we'd have more incidents, but we've got far fewer based on overall numbers and averages. Aberdeen Tiny Library. So here we are. So excited, and staff worked so hard from the fall, and it was really just a few short months from the time that the board approved this project to go ahead, the pilot project to go ahead in September at the end of August at our out-of-town board meeting, to opening, I think, 1 week shy of exactly where we thought we would land. So mid-November, we brought the Tiny Library and its services to South Kamloops, and it was breakneck speed. So just a remarkable team effort here, you know, with the staff and the team. So what I'd like to do is ask Justin if he could plug into a video. I think it will tell a really great story. Marco Schiller recently did an interview with CJFC, and it wasn't just aired here, but in fact, Jenny Abramczyk let me know that an uncle of hers in Edmonton had watched the video clip. So we got lots of great air for this. So I'm going to ask Justin to plug this in.
Reading and visiting the library are among the more popular things to do in Kamloops. According to the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library, there was a 12% increase in visits last year. In the city of Kamloops, the library's newest branch within Aberdeen Mall has become a popular spot, in addition to the existing North Shore and downtown libraries. The growing number of visits to the newest branch may be an indicator that a larger space is needed. Delana Nishaw reports.
James Patterson is popular, but I think it's only because he puts a book out every 2 weeks.
Reading's not dead, according to the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library System. Stats from 2023 shows libraries in the Kamloops area were well utilized.
Visits were up in Kamloops by 12% actually, which amounts to over 20,000 people.
There isn't a singular reason for the increase, but the TNRL figures part of it has to do with people transitioning back into pre-pandemic levels of activity.
We also had a big increase in new library cards that we've handed out. So that was about a 26% increase from last year.
Alongside physical books, the library's other offerings also saw an uptick in use.
For this year, it was really interesting to see that our e-book and our e-audiobook numbers were up quite a bit this year. About a 15% increase from 2022, actually. So that amounted to 32,000 additional electronic items that were borrowed by patrons.
And the newest branch, a 353 square foot tiny library located in Center Court of Aberdeen Mall, has become even more popular than they'd hoped it would be.
During the week, there's a lot of people that like seniors during the week and stuff like that, but in the later part of the afternoon and on Saturdays especially, there's a lot of families, a lot of teens on Saturdays too, so we're getting the whole gamut.
Parking and other mall amenities are a big draw for people dropping in to pick up or return a book. So is the new machine for holds, complete with RFID scanning technology to track which books are picked up.
By this afternoon, this will be very full because it will, I don't know, I've probably got a couple hundred holds to put in it, something like that. So I filled it to capacity twice now. There's one day I had to stop checking items in because I couldn't fit anything else in it. So we've ordered another one. So yeah, it's going great guns around here.
The tiny library also gives better insight into what sort of demand there is for a full-sized facility in the southwest sector.
It is our dream and our hope one day to have a standalone library in this sector. And that's going to be years in the future. We don't know when. And so having this location at the mall is a great opportunity to provide that service in the southwest of Kamloops here and now for people.
The official ribbon cutting of the mall location is set for February 16th. Delana Nishaw, CFJC News.
Super. So just a reminder that we are, as a municipality, we're lagging far behind other municipalities, including Kelowna, Nanaimo, Red Deer, municipalities of the same size in terms of overall square footage for library services, but also in terms of number of locations. We are continuing to explore opportunities with the city of Kamloops for a full-size library in South Kamloops. But in the meantime, I think that our wee tiny library is packing a great big punch. We have this slide here representing the growth in South Kamloops. It's taken from the CAM plan. Some 45 or 43% of population growth will be seen in the city's southwest. So I did hand out, and this is good fun. We actually, the 1.0 that we had of this particular handout was the mobile library. Delighted that we could provide to you our 2.0, which is our Build Your Tiny Library handout. You'll have good fun with that on the weekend, no doubt. And just as a reminder that while we've done a great job in terms of building the tiny library, we need to set our sights on our next project, which hopefully in the not so distant future would be a South Kamloops library. So I want to thank you for your time and attention this morning. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much. All right, I've got Director Sow, Director Blackwell for me, and Hamer Jackson. So Director Sow first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the RFID projects, I'm just wondering if there will be any cost savings trackings, because you mentioned, you know, it would reduce amount of staff time needed and even reducing the number of checkout machines that we need in the future, relying on the users to use their phone and such. Yeah, is there going to be a cost savings tracking? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think the cost savings will be inherent in the staff time. So a good amount of time is spent with circulation activities. You know, there's no getting around it. We do move a lot of materials around the system to fulfill patron holds and new materials that are going out to all of our libraries. All that does require some physical intervention in terms of checking them in or bringing them into the system. So our hope is that we'll bring some relief to that and be able to actually purpose some of that time to doing more engagement. So, you know, we want to be more face forward as opposed to, you know, spending as much time as we do with circulation. So in terms of overall savings for staff time, that time would actually be deployed and better spent, you know, doing readers advisory work, you know, preparing and planning for programs, et cetera. In answer to your question in terms of the self-checks, those self-check stations, we have an amazing IT team here. And in fact, our solution for self-check was built in-house. So if we look at what the cost would have been for a self-check machine, had we gone through a vendor solution, we'd be looking at about $15,000 per USD. And instead, what we have is a PC unit with some additional peripheral items, and those costs are probably in the $1,500 to $1,600 range. So we're not anticipating that we can dispense with those immediately. We're just looking at other means to make it really convenient for patrons. So I would suggest that, yeah, perhaps in the future, as those units need to be replaced, we may be able to actually use the app for checking out library materials. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. One last question. And just out of curiosity, now hearing the numbers like in the tens of thousands of users, is there any plan or strategy for you know, using big data to share with other departments at the TNRD, like info and the readership and topics even? I'm not sure if that's going to touch into privacy issues, but I'm just wondering if your team has any, you know, kind of direction in that way, compiling the data and sharing it with other departments.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The library is very much data driven in terms of, you know, collection development, for example. You know, very much so. Patron requests, patron use. It really does inform our collections, hours of service, staffing, programs, et cetera, et cetera. So we do collect a lot of data. And in fact, we're looking at a means of collecting data in a better way. We have an in-house data collection system that we're going to need to address as one of our operational priorities for 2024. We haven't done an awful lot in terms of interdepartmental data sharing. However, you know, the library does work very closely with IT. And, you know, so for example, we can tell how often, you know, our internet stations are being used and, you know, for example, the plans for Clearwater are kind of pointing in the direction that we probably don't need to have quite so many personal computers or PCs there, for example. So, you know, we do look at all of those types of performance indicators as we plan for services and, you know, plan for replacement, et cetera. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Director Blackwell.
Yeah, thank you. A couple comments. First, one, Kaylee Prime, our librarian, has her first book out, A Spark from Embers. It's available for download on Barnes & Noble and a couple other platforms, and I think we're getting a couple copies in our library. So congratulations to her. And then Amber Cowie, who's also a former Clearwater resident and now based in Squamish. I think she has her 4th or 5th book coming out, The Off Season, and it apparently is a zinger, getting fantastic reviews, and will probably be on the bestseller lists again, as have her last few books. My question being, with seeing the sort of downsizing of traditional bookstores, especially the larger one up in that area, how much of a factor do you think that is? That people can actually come in and physically see books at the new tiny library and browse in a way that we used to be able to do at record stores and bookstores all the time and make up our mind, spend hours there, and now those opportunities are disappearing and becoming the library. So, you know, I see that as a pretty strong case. It'd be interesting if there's any stats on that available in the world for speeding up the process for putting in this new library in place, the new larger library in place.
Okay, so I'm trying to break down your question and I'm a little bit hard of hearing.
So, so the basis of it is there any statistical information out there to say that the decline in commercial bookstores is leading to more of a trend for people visiting libraries, or is it an independent thing?
I would say that, yeah, I think the cost for these bookstores to be running their physical operations are huge. I think that we're seeing that generally in terms of retail. So we're seeing a lot of bricks and mortars and retail going, strictly speaking, to online. I find it interesting, however, that, you know, people, you know, will look online and then shop with us. And I think that we kind of buck the trend that way because people are constantly hearing about new books and various media and whatnot. And I think that, you know, the savvy among us are actually looking to the library to be borrowing those same items that they could otherwise borrow. So I think our challenge is getting our word out very strongly that, you know, that we have, you know, databases and content that rivals what's in the marketplace. So for example, audible.com, we've got great ebooks and e-audiobooks that we license for. DVDs, you know, we have Hoopla and various other things. So I think that we kind of fill in the blanks for an awful lot of people. And I think that space is a really critical thing for the library. I think that one of the other trends, and now I'm going off on perhaps a bit of a tangent, but when as people, and we know that increasingly adults are living alone. And owing to economic factors, people are living in smaller and smaller spaces. And people are more and more connected online. But as all of those things come into play, the need for face-to-face is becoming more critical. So we're actually seeing a bit of a renaissance and renewed interest in our library programs and people being able to come together. So the library plays a really important social and connection role. So at any rate, thanks for letting me go on. We could have a much further discussion on those. But yes, we do very much track trends and we look to the marketplace and bookstores and like to see what's going on. And in some ways, you know, we do adopt a retail model with the way that we merchandise library materials. We've got a very strong website that we introduced about 3 years ago. Yeah, lots of people use us and people are very surprised when they learn that it's not their grandmother's library anymore and that there is as much going on in libraries as what we have happening here at the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library. Thank you.
Director Hamer-Jackson.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, does your staff or users or clients experience any inappropriate behavior at any other libraries within the TNRD that could use CSOs or security guards or, you know, any of that, you know, for the safety of everyone, like the North Shore Library? And do you feel if there was security that you would get more users or clients?
Thank you for your question. I am so excited by this partnership with the community service officers and with the city of Kamloops. And I think that where the library really aligns so strongly, and I don't think I mentioned this, is on what we refer to as voluntary compliance. You know, we, on the library side, we deal with people from all walks of life, and we endeavor never to judge a book by its cover. So for people who are coming in, you know, who are perhaps challenged and whatnot, they're welcomed. Our staff do not place value judgments on people coming in to our spaces. Where we may have issues is on the behavioral side. And I will say that the community service officers are very much aligned with that. So I think that that has been the big benefit at the North Kamloops Library. In response to your question regarding other areas where we may encounter issues, I think it's very fair to say that we encounter issues here downtown. You know, in both locations, downtown and North Shore, I best describe them as, you know, really central urban libraries. So yes, I think that it could be beneficial having something that would be along the lines of a community service officer here downtown as well. But it's something that we need to examine, and bit of a process there.
Supplemental. What I'm kind of wondering is any other areas within the TNRD, like in, you know, anywhere else. It's a TNRD is a big area.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering anywhere else within the TNRD.
Yeah. So I think reflecting on your question, it would be Merritt. Merritt has some issues. I think that our library branch head there, Claire, has worked really closely with the RCMP and local service providers, again, in dealing with vulnerable population and dealing with, you know, mental health and people who are needing additional support. I don't think that we're at that point with Merritt Library that we would need security or a CSO type model at this point, but it's something that we do monitor. And I will say, just to give the board some confidence, that all of our incidents are documented by staff, and we look at those as they come in. Scott looks at those, HR looks at those, I look at those, my management team looks at those. So, and with staff, we do debriefs on every major incident, you know, yeah, so we do track them very carefully. That's why I was able to kind of pull that data, looking at 2022 figures to 2023, what was actually happening in terms of numbers for those behaviors, the negative behaviors we were encountering at the North Shore. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Sarai, then Director Onslow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that presentation and past conversations with yourself and your amazing team. We talked about the success of the tiny library, but we also want to see like a relaunch of users to show in the future that there's a need for an actual bigger building. So can you share of anything like a relaunch campaign that we've thought about? I know some of our rough conversations have been signing up residents that come to a Blazer game or big events. And how would that look? Would they still need a library card? Can they have that phone app on them and be an online user and an in-building user? But I think it'll really support future growth and needs if we have that number.
Thank you, Director Sarai. And I have not forgot that recent conversation that you and I have. And I do have Kristen Rodriguez's name sitting right at my desk. And I'm excited to look forward to working with the city on a Kamloops-wide library campaign. Because of the activities that we will be engaging in beginning in the fall. So our big celebration for our 50th anniversary this year, together with strategic planning, we really want to do an outstanding job of going out to community and engaging them. So we're going to look for really kind of best practices, things that are fresh and fun and engaging for people so that, you know, people are really aware of what the library has to offer and people can all get behind that. So that idea of having all Kamloops residents have a library card at hand is kind of seared into my brain, and something that as soon as this little production that we have going today is behind us, that we'll turn our attention onto the engagement front. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Onslow, then Director Stamer.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm just curious, I saw recently that the library in Kamloops was offering tutoring to adults for math or language arts, those types of educational opportunities. And I'm curious if our library would plan to roll those out to be online for residents, obviously in Blue River or further outlying libraries.
I think that's a really interesting notion in terms of online. Of course, you know, the challenge in delivering programming to, you know, our furthest reaches, Blue River, for example. Yeah, there may be options for online. When it comes to delivering a lot of these types of activities, though, we are in partnership with other organizations. So it's not the library that's actually delivering face-to-face in terms of the tutoring. We do some tech tutoring, but we do work with our local literacy community for those other things. But I think that that's something that that we might want to explore, you know, with our management team in terms of how we could extend those opportunities. I think we've got great things in place, you know, with our connections, and probably the best thing that came out of, well, one of the only good things that came out of the pandemic was our ability to connect, and our interfaces and teams, which we're using here at the TNRD, is really powerful and strong. So I think we should continue with that conversation. And I get very excited about strategic planning and having further conversations and ideas generation, just like what you've put forward. Thank you.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Director Onslow, I know you recently sent me an email about an experience you had. I thought maybe you could share it as well.
In our little library up in Blue River, the other day I was driving past it, and the whole parking lot was full, and there was only parking along the street. I thought, what the heck is happening? Like, this is unheard of. And so I went into the library after, and we've hired a new librarian who reached out to all of the parents and started like a mom and tot morning, and then she's also doing afternoon coffees and teas, etc. So anyway, the engagement, she had 24 patrons in the library, and that is huge for our little town. So yeah, and that was now the second week in a row that it's happened. So this happened again on Wednesday. I just think it's amazing. So yeah.
I want to say congratulations. That's probably the highest per capita engagement that we have in the library system altogether. So, and a great sharing. Thank you. And it just goes to show that, you know, it's so important to have the right staff and the staff that are looking towards, you know, connecting with the community and so on, that one person can really make a big difference. So yeah, awesome.
Thank you, Director Stamer.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation, Judy. It's great. I really appreciate being able to see all the good things that you and your staff have been able to do with the regional library. A couple of questions. Question number one, can you remind us what the square footage size of the North Kamloops Library is? And if you were considering a South Kamloops Aberdeen library size, what are you looking for?
Thank you, Director Stamer. So I think I don't have it right in front of me. I'm almost a little bit nervous about giving exact numbers, but our North Shore Library is approximately 20,000 square feet. And it houses the mobile library and our library home service in the back end of that library. In our facilities master plan, we are looking at a library square footage that would be in the caliber of about 25,000 square feet. We know that, I've shown videos to the board. Our mobile library we're very challenged by parking it where it is. We've had many near misses with having to back it up. It requires that we go into a busy little corridor that's getting busier all the time. So hence, if we're looking at square footages, it's the public services area combined with that mobile library. So it'd be somewhere in that 25,000 square foot range
Okay.
that we would be asserting.
Okay. No, I understand and appreciate that. And if I may, can you or do you see a transition from people purchasing books to more of a rental library use for book materials, Judy? And supplementally, will that increase our budget for purchasing books and learning materials? Do you see that trend? If we're seeing chapters and some of these stores getting smaller and smaller, do you see more of a trend of people being able to actually rent the book and not having to purchase it outright?
It's not a trend in terms of public libraries that I'm aware of. I will say that probably in the last decade, where libraries had been charging, and I'll use the example of Alberta, that Calgary and Edmonton had been charging patron fees, sort of a membership fee, if you will, annually. I think $10, $12 comes to mind. But libraries have gone away from that. And I think that the notion of having a rental for individual items may really pose some challenges for libraries, just in terms of being a leveler and creating that unimpeded access for everyone to share. So
sorry to interrupt you. I wasn't suggesting starting a rental program. I was thinking of the mindset where you're not purchasing books. You're able to just, you're using the library's facilities to be able to use it and then bring it back. Sorry, I wasn't thinking of trying to change the model. I was just suggesting the mindset of, instead of going into a bookstore and buying a book and then trying to deal with what do I do with the book after I'm finished with it, does it make more sense? And is there a trend of more people, actually looking towards a library so they don't have to do that? Not only is a cost saving method, but also more flexibility and being able to actually consume more reading material in a period of time.
Yeah, and I think that's wherein lies our outreach efforts is to be able to communicate that to as many people as possible, and that we are kind of the number one purveyor of print and content for public use. So.
Okay, and I'd be remiss to not throw a shout out for Pam Rood in Barrier as well, because she's done a super job on behalf of you guys, and I really wanted to thank her online, because she's done a wonderful job with all the programs that she's put forward. We really appreciate her in our community.
Thank you for that. I'll pass that along to Pam as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Sao?
Thank you. Sorry, one more question. All this talk about partnership got me excited. At the risk of sounding like throwing the kitchen sink into the mobile library, but is there any plans for outreach to say like Surfaces BC or even our own FireSmart education booths to combine more stuff into the mobile library so that we can maybe share the costs, because I know some user areas or municipalities have an issue with costs. That might be would that be a direction that you guys would be looking into? Thanks.
Thank you for your question. I know that in recent years, Melissa Lowenberg, our manager of community libraries, has worked very closely with our TNRD fire support and also those FireSmart programs. I can't begin to enumerate all the things that she's worked with Kevin Skrupnik and that team on. So quite right. And fair comment. The more that we can actually, drive various other activities from the TNRD into the mobile library, getting the word out collaboratively, the better. It was a short time ago, not this past election where we saw lots of turnover here at this board table, but the previous one that we actually introduced advanced voter polling through the mobile library, and we won a UBCM award for that innovation, and that continued in the last election as well. So I get excited about these conversations and having them with the directors here at the table. And I think that, when we're looking at our strategic planning exercise, I want to hear all of it. We're overdue. And I think that the TNRD board is a very important stakeholder group that we'll want to have discussions with, including yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Just two questions. When do we anticipate having the app rolling out by?
So I have it on good authority from Jenny Abramczyk. This is one of her projects. She tells me that we should probably have it out within about 2 months. So I believe she heard from the vendor that they're set and ready to go. So we'll be going through our branding process, where you may have noticed everything's beginning to kind of have a cogent and similar look and feel. It's exactly what we want. So branding process and then connectivity. Jenny, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, by the latest.
Wow. Mid-April, she says. So, okay, we'll hold her to that.
And regarding the drivers for the mobile library, they need air brakes. Do they need a certain class of license? 1, 2? I'm ignorant of these things.
Well,
they're class 5.
So are we looking at someone specifically for that Sun Peaks day on the Sunday, or are we looking for a more general driver, or is it 2 things at once?
It's 2 things at once. So if they were interested in the Sunday, they could additionally pick up some casual hours for vacation relief and things like that. So many of you may recall that our terrific branch head of Tiny Aberdeen was our former branch head of the mobile library. So my loss is Margot's gain for staffing. So we've been able to fill Mike's position with an internal candidate who's been doing a terrific job, but we could use a couple more hands in the department just to ensure that we have fullness of service and again, to backfill holidays and things like that. So yeah.
Thank you. So class 5 with air brakes. Okay.
And mechanical aptitude.
Okay. And I just want to say thank you. You've touched on this, Director Hamer Jackson touched on it. We get a lot of people crossing the doors of libraries every day, and not all of them are there to check out the latest James Patterson book. Some of them are challenged in different ways. And I've said this before, and I'll keep on saying it. Libraries and live theater are the 2 most welcoming, inclusive, no questions asked, we accept you the way you are places that I know of. And that, I think, in today's world is another reason that we need to value our libraries, because everyone can find a safe harbor there. And no one will judge you. It doesn't matter if you have lots of money or if you have no money. You are welcome to go into a library, and no one is going to judge you if you've gone in there to get warm or to get cool or to get a break from whatever demons are haunting you. And so I for that reason, if nothing else, we need to support our libraries, keep our libraries going. And I am continually amazed by how innovative and thinking outside the box everyone at TNRL is. So thank you very much to all of you for all that you do. I don't know if it's just branch wide, but the Ashcroft Library is doing a tiny art show. You can get 5-inch by 5-inch canvases and everything you need to create your own. I hesitate to use the word masterpiece, but you can create your own work. And 5 by 5 is about, I don't know, about that big. So it's small. And I think that's going very well in Ashcroft. So that's a neat innovation. It's not something that I would have found in libraries in my day. And I think it's great that people can go in there and create a painting for free.
Thank you, Chair. Our libraries really serve as a backdrop for the arts, and we have many partnerships with the arts across the TNRD. Director Stamer will be pleased to hear this, that this was Pam Rudd's brainchild out in Barrier, and Kaylee Prime quickly followed suit at Clearwater, and it seems to be kind of making its way through our library system. So I know that it really engages the community, and people get quite excited by the tiny art. So I think there's more tiny art to come.
Are there any other questions or comments? Nothing online? All right. Yep, one more question or comment from Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually a big thank you to everyone for this airtime. I love coming and talking about the library, and I get excited about our future, that's for sure. One of the initiatives that we launched this last fall was 1001 Before Grade 1. So we are working with Interior Health on that initiative. It replaces our Books for Babies, and we target infants and preschoolers. So I would be remiss if I didn't provide to Director O'Reilly 1001 Before Grade 1. This is the Kinder bag.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like I got one of these 6 years ago.
You did.
My first NRL meetings.
I think it was. I just, yeah. I'll upgrade it a little bit. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Any more questions or comments? Thank you very much. We'll just have a quick 5-minute break so everyone can refresh their coffees. Thank you very much, everyone. We move on to our next presentation, which is from the Agricultural Land Commission. We have online Kim Grout, CEO of the Agricultural Land Commission, Katerina Glavis, Senior Agrologist, and Lindsay McCoubry, Policy Planner. So thank you very much for joining us today, and the floor is yours virtually.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, Kim Grout, the Agricultural Land Commission. I'll have Lindsay advancing the slides. A few of us are going to take turns here, walk you through a little bit of an overview of who we are, what we do, and then hopefully open it up to questions at the end. So Lindsay, if you could bring up the next slide for me, please. I wanted to start off first acknowledging that the work of the Commission spans the territories, ancestral territories of 204 First Nations, and that myself and my staff today are joining you from the unceded traditional territory of the Squamish and Halkidinum speaking peoples, Coast Salish peoples here in Burnaby, where our head office staff resides that work for the Commission. And if we go to the next slide, Lindsay, just touching a little bit on what a tribunal is, what the Commission is, and how that informs the work that we do. We're an independent tribunal. There's upwards of 100 administrative tribunals that operate in BC, administering legislation adopted by government. And our province is divided into 6 administrative regions, where our members are appointed by the sitting Minister of Agriculture. And within these 6 administrative regions, each one of our members has to be from a different regional district. We can't, for example, have 2 commissioners from the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. They must be from different regions within the province, and our statute sets out that the members the minister appoints is doing so based on their knowledge and experience in agriculture, local or First Nations government, and land use planning as the legislation prescribes. Our commissioners are appointed to uphold the mandate that's set out in the Agricultural Land Commission Act, which of course is to preserve agricultural land, encourage farming and collaboration with other community interests, and to encourage all levels of government to adopt bylaws and policies and plans that are supportive of farm preservation and encouraging farming. And our statute was actually updated in 2019 to clarify that the Commission, when exercising any of its powers and authorities under this Act, must give priority to protecting and enhancing the size, integrity, and continuity of the ALR and its use for farming. So when making and exercising any of those powers, that's what the Commission is directed to do by the legislation. And as I've said, our commissioners administer the Act. We do not draft it. The Commission oftentimes learns of administrative and legislative amendments at the same time you do. We often refer to it as trying to drive and build and drive the plane at the same time in terms of what statute and regulatory changes might mean on the ground. And we appreciate there has been a tremendous amount of change in the last several years, and we appreciate that we're all working to administer this statute many times at the same time. And oftentimes we hear the suggestion that decisions are made in Burnaby. That's not the case. The staff, of course, we're mostly centrally located in Burnaby, but our commissioners are the ones that make decisions, and they're appointed to panels. There's one for each of the 6 administrative regions. And so in the interior region in which TNRD sits, the decisions are made by commissioners from the Caribou and the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. A tribunal does not take direction from government, any of them. What we do on substantive issues, though, is take our direction from the legislation that's adopted by government. When we administer it, we have to work within the box that's prescribed by that statute. And as a commission and a tribunal, commissioners have to make their decisions in writing based on the submission of evidence that's put before them, facts, individual cases, and how that aligns with the legislation. And so, in a bit of an overview or a nutshell, that's what the Commission is. If we go to the next slide and take a look at and talk about the land base in which we all work and live in many cases. The ALR is a provincial zone where agriculture is recognized as priority use, and non-farm uses are regulated and or prohibited or restricted, recognizing that oftentimes there's a process that can involve the commission and local government in terms of contemplating something that's not outright permitted. And we too have just turned 50. The Agricultural Land Commission Act was enacted in April of 1973, and it was the first piece of legislation of its kind in Canada, potentially North America, that really ushered in a program to try to preserve the province's limited agricultural resource. And the Act itself has had much broader implications in terms of trying to sustain a viable agricultural industry in every region of the province, and in some cases has shaped growth over the past 50 years, acting as a bit of a de facto urban growth boundary. The adoption of the Act at the time sent a clear message that the protection of agricultural land was really a public good, and that if it had been left to markets and private individuals, would likely be underprovided today, which is something we see happening in lots of other countries who in many cases are beginning to acquire land here in BC and elsewhere to try to improve their own food security. We go to the next slide. The agricultural land reserve itself, due to our complex topography and varied climate, makes up less than 5% of the total province's land base. Noting you need the right combination of soil, climate, slope, and drainage to support farming. And this isn't really surprising when you look at this slide. You find the agricultural land really in the valley bottoms. 75% of our province is over 1,000 meters in elevation. And so as a result, the lands that are suitable for farming are also very attractive for other forms of development. And so the pressure on the ALR really continues to be immense. I suggest that many of the same reasons contemplated in 1973, the establishment of the reserve, really continue till this day. But given that the reserve was, the establishment of it was based on biophysical landscape criteria, if we go to the next slide, Lindsay, and it didn't take into account variables like market, ownership, or other socioeconomic factors when it was established, and really just looked at soil and climate in its assessment of land capable of supporting farming. It includes both private and public land. So when we talk about that, just under 5% of the land base, 4.6 million hectares of ALR, 54% of it is actually unsurveyed Crown or parcels that are identified as Crown Federal, Crown Provincial, Crown Agency, or Reserve. So much of that tension that we feel on the land base is actually really concentrated in just under half of the ALR that's privately owned. And in that layer as well, the ALC has done some estimation and has determined that right out of the gate, about 7% of the land base that we talk about is actually unavailable for farming, in that it's made up of wetlands, rivers, lakes, and other infrastructure like airports, roads, rail lines, utility corridors. So you can appreciate, the tight nature of that land base in which we're all working to manage. And if we zoom in and look at the interior administrative region where you're located, it's a vast region. It contains 33% of all of BC's ALR, but 68% of that ALR is what we kind of refer to as Crown ownership, which is the largest percentage of Crown ownership in any single administrative region in the province. So it's rather unique, tremendously viable agricultural land, but a tremendous amount within Crown ownership, where we see lots of pressures and competing uses. And the provincial government oftentimes is the determinant factor in terms of access and what can occur there. While it makes up a big portion of the province's ALR, 9.4% of the interior region is ALR. And if we just look quickly at the next slide, just a snapshot of the TNRD and the ALR shown there in green, you can really see it's those valley bottoms and lower plateau areas identified for agriculture. And we did an exercise once respecting that the ALR, because it is contained within these valley bottoms, and more often wondered what would it look like if you squished it all down into one contiguous area, it would essentially fit in the Thompson-Nicola Regional District if we moved all of the ALR into the province so that it was contiguous and connected, just to give you sort of a scale or concept of the land base that we're talking about. And if we go to the next slide, Lindsay, thanks. I just wanted to touch base a little bit on the legislative framework and what it means for all of us. The ALC isn't the only agency responsible for administering and upholding the ALC Act and its regulations. If we go to the next slide, Lindsay, the legislative framework, the construct on which our statute is built on, is that both the province and local governments have a role in administering this legislation. The province has concurrent legislation, but the statute says that the ALC Act isn't superseded by any other provincial act or regulation, regardless of when it is enacted, with the exception of the Interpretation Act, the Environment Land Use Act, and the Environmental Management Act, which means it's a fairly strong piece of legislation. And a minister or agent of government is directed not to exercise a power under these other enactments unless it complies with the statute. So the premise is that we're all thinking about the ALR when doing the work that we do in that landscape. And if we go to the next slide, focusing in on local government and First Nation governments, modern First Nation governments with treaties, which is how our legislation refers to First Nations, is that any bylaw or law at the local government or First Nation government level is directed to be consistent with the Act and regulation. And in those areas where local bylaws are not consistent, those portions of those laws are considered of force and effect, which is significant. And if we go to the next slide, Lindsay, you start to, this was a slide we sort of put together of what the vision laid out in the legislative framework is that you would have the Agricultural Land Commission Act, and underneath that, regional growth strategies, official community plans, and zoning bylaws that are communicating what can occur in the ALR, which is really important when you think about the public and their reliance on working with local governments. Go to the next slide, Lindsay, thank you. And even though that was the vision, the goal in the statute I just showed you, we know it's more like this. We have some alignment, we have some consistency. We don't necessarily have that everywhere, which can be challenging for property owners and prospective purchasers who we know often make land use decisions based on the availability of local legislation and what they see set out there. So, you know, that can create conflict and challenge at times. And if you think about the ALR and its jurisdiction, then 90% of the ALR is within the jurisdiction of regional districts, which is, you know, makes this a really important component of us working together to administer farmland protection. If we go to the next slide, we're just going to touch a little bit on applications. We often hear, you know, if someone doesn't feel like they see what they want to do in the ALR set out in the statute, there's this perception that it's an automatic no. It's not the case. We're set up here to adjudicate, our commissioners to adjudicate applications for change. So if you want to remove land from the ALR, a local government or a prescribed public body could apply to do so, and our commissioners will put their mind to that. But property owners can apply to include land, to subdivide land, or conduct a use that isn't permitted, they do not see expressed outright, or to carry out an activity that doesn't comply with a threshold that might be set out in the statute. For example, you can have a farm retail facility if 50% of what you sell in the retail space is produced on your farm, for example. So if someone feels like they can't achieve those thresholds, wants the commission to put its mind to something else, there's a path of application for that. We go to the next slide. All applications, for the most part, start with local government. So we do host a portal on our website, but that came about as a direction from the provincial government that all provincial agencies needed to move to online application and permitting processes. And we had over 150 local governments who were the starting place for all ALC applications prior to 2015. You walked up to your local government counter to make an application. Local government put their mind to that application, whether or not they were going to forward it to the commission, and then did so. Our portal functions much the same way. Anyone wishing to make an application does so by going through the portal on our website. But the very first place that application goes when they hit submit is the local government. We at the Commission don't see that application until it's been considered by a local government board or council. You have your processes, you might have an agriculture advisory committee, you might have a public information meeting. If it's an exclusion application, either yourselves are initiating or a prescribed body, there's a public hearing. And once you've evaluated that application in terms of our statute, your legislation, a resolution to send it to the Commission may be passed, or you also have the authority not to submit an application to the Commission. Process would end if you elected not to forward that application. Once the application is submitted to us and we receive the prescribed fee, our part of the process starts and we can see the application now. We go through our process, which may involve a site visit, an applicant meeting to better understand the evidence in the application material. And then ultimately all of that material is put together, put before the statutory decision makers who work to clarify what is the issue they're trying to decide under our law. They make findings based on the evidence that's in that application, and they have to explain the decision in light of what the law says they must consider and the facts that are before them in a particular case. So a little bit different than local government. As a tribunal, quasi-judicial, it's a written hearing process, and it's one that's based on an evidentiary record that they have to consider in light of the law and formulate a collective written decision. They must write that decision together. And if we go to the next slide, Lindsay, we just wanted to touch briefly on the notice of intent process. So this is a relatively new process. It did not exist prior to 2019. It was introduced by government to try to address what appeared to be, in some parts of the province, rampant and intentional fill dumping in the ALR under the predication that it might be for agriculture, but in many cases far exceeded, and in many cases was material that was not conducive to supporting agriculture. And so our legislation was changed to really limit the types of activities that could bring on fill without requiring, at a minimum, authorization of the Commission through a notice of intent process. My staff will chat about that a little bit. It is a process that's initiated directly to the Commission. So if you go into the portal and you have something where you require soil or fill, you can submit a notice of intent through our portal that's reviewed by staff. This process is a little different in that a notice of intent is not decided by a commissioner appointed by government. So in saying that, the staff that work here that have been delegated some authority to make decision-making for soil and fill by law can only consider the authorization for uses that are outright permitted in the legislation. So if someone wanted to put forward an application that exceeded a threshold or contemplated a use that wasn't expressly permitted, our staff can't authorize fill in order for an activity that's not been authorized by the Commission to consider. So in staff's evaluation of the submissions of the proposals or plans, what have you, that come forward, they have to put their mind to whether or not it's permitted. If it's permitted, fill is reasonable, supporting an activity that's clearly conducive to agriculture and part of a permitted use in the legislation, they can issue a notice to allow that work to proceed. If there isn't that alignment with the request being tied very clearly to something that's contemplated in the statute, then an authorization cannot be issued, and a process of use that's requesting the material really has to be put forward in front of the statutory decision makers. So two very different processes, but get into some examples a little later on with respect to the notice of intent. If we go to the next slide, Lindsay. If we look at our annual report, which is available on our website and includes all kinds of stats, including stats that drill down to applications received by local government, not just at the regional level, which I have here for you. You can see that Interior is probably quietest region in terms of overall applications that we receive. I did take a look at the stats though, and did see that Thompson-Nicola Regional District the last few years has been one of the top 5 local governments in terms of overall applications submitted to the Commission. So while this slide, implies a little less activity in your particular region, sort of top 5 in terms of total numbers of applications submitted for commission consideration. So 364 applications received. This is pretty consistent. We basically get a new application every day. Commissioners must put their mind to. And right now are issuing about 30 decisions, 30, 31 a month. But that being said, applications from the previous year are still moving forward. So it's a lot of decisions for our tribunal. I would suggest we make more decisions than any other tribunal in BC. If we go to the next slide, Lindsay. Notices of intent, which we've really only been involved in since mid-2019. We see most of these requests for soil and fill, not surprisingly, from the South Coast, followed by the island and Okanagan. We tend to see a trend of these requests being in the more highly populated parts of the region, and the bulk of them are for residential uses. My staff will talk about it a little bit, but the statute has very limited circumstances where someone can bring in fill, which is very broadly defined in the statute, which means that most structures are requiring some authorization from the commission to move forward. And on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay and Katarina to walk through the rest of the presentations.
Okay, great. So yeah, now we're going to talk specifically about residential structures. So I'm going to go through what's permitted in the regulation with respect to principal residences, suites, and additional residences. I'll also go over the soil and fill rules for those uses specifically and talk about the difference between how an accessory structure is defined in a local government bylaw and how it's written in the ALR use regulation. And then Katarina will get into talking about what we thought we would see with respect to accessory structures like garages and personal shops, as well as some of the considerations of the NOI decision maker that Kim was talking about, and some property specific considerations for size, use, and placement of those accessory residential structures. And finally, we'll go through the 2 guides that the ALC has published in the last year, the farm structure guidelines and the accessory residential structures guidelines, which was just published 2 weeks ago, and how they can be used by landowners, builders, and local governments. So currently, this is what's permitted in the ALR regulations. So you can have a 500 square meter principal residence, and you can have a suite within that residence. And you can also have a small additional residence, which size depends on how big the parcel is. So for parcels up to 40 hectares in size, landowners are permitted to have 1 principal residence up to 500 square meters in size with a suite inside that principal residence, and 1 additional residential dwelling up to 90 meters squared in size. And if the property is over 40 hectares, then that additional residence can be up to 186 meters squared. So this is the maximum that's permitted in the provincial legislation, but local government bylaws can be more restrictive if that's what works better for your community. And so like Kim was talking about with the NOI process coming in 2019 and the soil and fill changes that came with that, the ALR use regulation permits 1,000 square meter area for soil and fill specifically for the principal residence, but does not have an outright permission for any soil or fill for an additional residence or for any accessory residential structures. And therefore, those structures would require a notice of intent to remove soil from the property or to bring fill in order to build them. And so when we talk about those other residential related structures, the ALR use regulation is written in a way it permits a structure that is necessary for residential use. But most local government bylaws, if they do have a definition, they're defining an accessory structure or an ancillary structure to that residential use. But just because something may meet a local government's definition of an accessory residential structure or an ancillary structure doesn't mean that it's automatically considered necessary for residential use as written in the ALR use regulations. So those aren't always a one-to-one equal relationship. And because all accessory residential structures and additional residences require a notice of intent to require to place fill before it can be started, Local governments may not authorize an additional residence or accessory structure that requires soil and fill unless a notice of intent has been submitted and approved by the ALC. And when we're talking about fill and what's coming onto the property, the fill is defined in the ALR as any material that's brought onto agricultural land or brought onto land in the ALR, other than materials that are exempted by regulation. So that includes things like structural fill and gravel. And so something that could be exempted, the example is for a principal residence, is that 1,000 square meter area that is defined in the regulation as a permitted use. But anything else requires approval from the commission through a notice of intent first. And so now Katarina will get into some of these accessory structures.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hopefully everybody can hear me loud and clear. So when we started getting NOIs related to accessory structures, this is kind of what we thought we would see. Just for context, the image on the left is about an 80 square meter or 860 square foot workshop or garage, and the image on the left is about 150 square meters or 1,600 square meters. We thought these would be reasonable accessory residential uses in the ALR. Next slide. Lindsay, next slide. Thank you. But what we started seeing was more structures of this size. So this is a 390 square meter storage building. It was just identified as a storage building. There was not going to be any farming going on the property. They didn't have any farm equipment, and it was just for apparently for personal use. I mean, this is about 3 to 4 times bigger than for context, the ones that I showed on the previous page. So once we start seeing buildings of this size, to us, it often suggests some other type of use, whether it be a commercial business or warehouse storage. It is a bit of a red flag for us. Next slide. So when we look at this, the site plan of this property, it becomes a little bit more apparent that there's something else going on here. So on the left-hand side, you'll see an existing driveway, an existing house, an existing garage, and a shop. And then you'll note that the proposed building has its own separate gravel driveway. So for an accessory use, it's, you know, we would like these buildings clustered with the residential uses. And to me, this is suddenly suggesting, okay, they have a separate driveway, that maybe this is for a commercial use. We do have a home occupation within our regulation. We do have allowances for home occupation, and allows up to 100 square meters for a home occupancy. So that this is, you know, 4 times that size. Local governments can also prescribe home businesses and things like that. But again, we're looking at this and thinking, okay, there's something going on here. So this was an NOI that did come through my team, and we determined that we couldn't determine if this was necessary for residential use. So it was refused. And often when that happens, the applicants get quite frustrated because I guess they didn't have enough information going into this to determine, okay, is this allowed or not? And that led us to developing these guidelines, which I'll talk to you in a bit. Next slide. What we are finding is landowners are starting to get quite creative. And as you know, or as within our regulation, there is the allowance for 1,000 square meter fill placement area for a farm building. Now, the key thing here is that farm building has to be for farm use. So what we're seeing a lot is a lot of these accessory buildings that are being designed to look like farming, which on the surface, this image looks fine. It's designed to look like a hayloft, but once you start looking into a little deeper, you'll start noticing things like, I'm not sure if you can see it, but at the top here, it says aesthetic barn door style shutters. In a typical hayloft, you would have a mezzanine where you would put your hay that you would throw down for your animals. This is a second completely enclosed second floor. I believe there was bathrooms in here on both floors as well. Just the more we dove into it, and when we started asking questions to the landowner, it became very obvious that this was for some other use. And if we look at the site plan, Lindsay, next page, it gets a lot more obvious when you look at the site plan. So this property is quite steep. The majority of this property is quite steep, and there's a relatively flat area here where he's decided to build structures that's less than 2 hectares. This is a future residence that he built out. It was built up to the maximum 500 square meters. And this building, the proposed building, farm building was 360 square meters or 3,875 square feet. So he was taking up a substantial part of his, I would say, easily usable agricultural land base for these structures. And when I asked him, well, what are you farming? He said, well, I've got 4 cows that I would like to graze in this area, and I need this 360 square meter building for these 4 cows with low ceilings and 2 floors. So it just clearly didn't make sense. In the end, this was refused. And, this guy came back to us and said, well, I don't understand why it was refused. There was no guidance or anything like that. So again, this led us to this idea of, okay, we need to have some guidelines. And we realized that we needed to have both a farm use structure guideline and accessory residential use guideline. So next slide, please. So in June 2023, we published the farm use structures guidelines. So it's been out for just under a year. And it provides guidance for the construction, maintenance, or operation of structures necessary for farm use as part of an application or an NOI. Typically, these will come through as an NOI first. If they're refused, the applicant has a choice to go to an application. Having said that, if it's been refused at the NOI level and they don't revise it, I'll bargain that it's likely to get refused by our commissioners as well. So the guideline identifies necessity and design considerations. So it gives a little bit more information as to how you should construct these types of buildings for farm use. And just a reminder, I know it's been mentioned a couple of times, but ALC authorization is not required if the fill placement area is less than 1,000 square meters and the farm structure is necessary for farm use. So I want to emphasize this because if a landowner comes to a local government and a local government takes a look at this farm structure and says, okay, there's no farming going on the property, I'm not sure if this makes any sense, and it's kind of obvious it's not for farm use, the local government can just say, no, we're not going to issue a building permit. And I would advise them to read through the guidelines and take those into consideration when constructing any type of structure. It's more likely that these are accessory structures, so the accessory structure guideline might be more appropriate in those cases. Next slide. So with respect to the necessity and design, for necessity, we're really looking for evidence and rationale. So the landowner needs to provide evidence and rationale as to why this farm use is needed. So do they have farm class? Are they farming? Are they developing a farm? So just a couple of examples. It can be kind of straightforward sometimes. So often if you see somebody with a big building proposal for a big building, there's no farming going on, there's no clear farm plan, and often these are brand new owners on the property. These can often be red flags, not always, but they can be. On the flip side, if it's an existing farm operation, there's obvious ag activity occurring on the property, the building is reasonable in size, these are usually legitimate farm use buildings. And I will say that it's often quite obvious. For me, at least, I will say that. So with respect to the design, they have to be functional for farm use. So we're looking for buildings with high ceilings, large open interior spaces, door clearance for farm equipment, single-story buildings. The minute we start seeing partition walls, low ceilings, second floors, it often suggests another use. So hopefully this will help local governments determine if a structure is a farm use or some other type of accessory use. Next slide, please. So we move on to the accessory residential structures guide. So this was just published 2 weeks ago. A reminder again that an NOI is required for all new accessory residential structures. It became really clear to us, Lindsay and I went out and did a bunch of consultation with different local governments that maybe the ALC hadn't let everybody know that this was a new thing and it wasn't that obvious within our regulations. We hadn't communicated it. So we're communicating this, any type of accessory structure in the ALR needs an NOI for the fill placement, for the placement of fill. So the accessory residential structures guideline identifies the types of accessory residential use structures and the design and site considerations that will be considered by the ALC CEO when assessing the use. And basically, it's kind of like a reasonable test. So we're not trying to be unreasonable when we're reviewing these, and we're not saying you can't have accessory buildings in the ALR. We just want ones that are appropriately placed, an appropriate size, that aren't negatively impacting the land base. Next slide, please. So I'll just kind of summarize what, the more important points. So the types of accessory residential structures that we consider are reasonable are things like personal recreational vehicle storage, residential workshops, household greenhouses, tool and garden sheds. So it goes into a little bit more specifics about the workshops and vehicle storage, and this kind of is also like a detached garage. I won't get into that too much because there is an allowance for a detached garage with the principal residence. But basically, I want to emphasize that these are guidelines. These are not hard and fast rules. So there may be room for, like something bigger or different in its design. But generally, the idea behind this is if you design it to these guidelines, it's very likely you will get approved through the NOI process, and there won't be this iterative process of going back and forth and people getting frustrated and having to redesign their accessory use and spending lots of money on their design with their architects and designers. So that's really the point of this here, is that if you look at this and you say, okay, I want to construct this, it should likely get approved if you follow these guidelines. So for parcels that are less than 40 hectares, we're recommending a maximum total floor area of 90 square meters. Having said that, local governments can make it can be more restrictive than that. For parcels that are greater than or equal to 40 hectares, a maximum total floor area of 186 square meters. The expectation is that these will be single story and clustered with other residential structures in an effort to minimize the impact on agricultural land. This is particularly important on smaller parcels of land. It might not be as important on large parcels, meaning greater than 40 hectares, but definitely on small parcels of land. Next slide. So just going back to these images with these guidelines, we're hoping that people will read these and say, okay, if I follow these guidelines, we can allow for a quicker streamlined process for NOIs. And these images are in the guideline. This is kind of what we're hoping that people will design their accessory structures along the line of these lines. I believe that's all I have. So is there any questions?
All right, thank you very much. I have Director Middleton, I have Director Hamer-Jackson, Director Sow, Director O'Reilly. All right, so Director Middleton.
Thank you for the presentation. Just my question, I know things have changed a lot from when the ALR was originally set up to now, but where does worker housing on farming fit into this? Is this residential? Is this farm use accessory buildings? I'm sure you probably have a lot of requests, and I do see where worker housing on farming is now part of the way many farms are having to operate.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. They can be in one of these additional residences that were identified on the slide. You can have your 50 square meter house, it can include a secondary suite, and there's this outright permission for an additional. That being said, we really don't necessarily always see labor in those units. Farmers have a path to make an application to the commission. We have a streamlined decision-making process if that farm labor accommodation is in like ATCO industrial camp style accommodation, which is what we see a tremendously large amount of, for example, in the Okanagan, hundreds of temporary farm worker labor accommodations being provided through that stream. And we do process a number of those applications every year. So if a farmer requires more labor than could be accommodated, for example, in the additional permitted residence, there's an application path to the commission. And that is probably our most common additional residence request is for labor accommodation. Because you're right, domestic labor isn't available, and in particular, a lot of federally supported labor programs, and they have to provide accommodations as part of that program. So we work really closely with the Western Agriculture Labor Initiative, the acronym is WALI, and they're also an agency that works really closely with industry to try to help them navigate the temporary foreign worker labor program if they need to access federal labor.
Director Hamer-Jackson.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the ALC has a lot to do with a lot of farmland that we've lost due to the change in the river flows along the riparian areas. And I know, like for instance, the North Thompson River from Barrie, I know Abbotsford, Merritt area. I'm just wondering if there's any involvement in protecting the riparian areas of farmland where people are losing a lot of acreage. Like I say, the North Thompson River from Barrie or down there, there's specific areas where, we've had acres of farmland, agriculture land, just landslide right into the river. And, to the point where their structures are at risk. I wonder if there's, any involvement there.
Sure. Thank you for the question. With respect to Sumas Prairie, we are part of a very large initiative that's looking, for example, at how to protect that area going forward, recognizing events of that scale when you have land that used to be part of a lake bottom will require either more armoring or more storage or channel capacity to deal with water. So it depends on the context of the question. In that scenario, we've been part of the planning exercise so that we can understand and comment on what the implications might be for agriculture, especially when you're trying to protect agriculture, but know you need more infrastructure perhaps to do that. And ultimately, there would be an application if if the ALR needed to be excavated or armored or more dike structures were required. And that's why we're at the multi-agency table in that scenario. We had to deal with a number of emergency work type of responses to deal with a little bit more like the scenario you're describing that might have involved armoring of what's, the land that has not been lost to ensure its retention. There's been some boundary adjustments that have had to occur because of infrastructure and farmland. We've had some utility companies transferring right-of-way and ownership to farms to improve and increase and make them whole while relocating and adjusting infrastructure that's been in many of the river corridors you're talking about. So we are involved. If the new solution or a change involves some discussion about the ALR, either subdivision or fill or excavation, then we're likely there. It just depends on the scenario, who's leading the initiative. Are we part of the lead up to what might happen, like for example in Sumas Prairie or Hatzic Lake area in the Lower Mainland? So it varies, but we would potentially have a role and are always open to engaging with those that want to talk about, plans for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sao.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sort of related to what Director Hamer-Jackson just mentioned. Just wondering if with climate change and the and water sources becoming stressed, does the ALC have like an ongoing review of ALRs as weather patterns change, like maybe making other areas more desirable for farming? Like, is there an annual review by the ALC to add or delete from the ALRs? Thank you.
Sure. Well, I mean, we're a very small agency and we're not out there looking to change the boundaries of the ALR, but we're certainly engaged in dialogues like, what does drought mean? How can agriculture survive going forward in some of these, ever-changing and hard to forecast environments? We have to eat 3 times a day. We don't have a very big land base. And so, for example, our commissioners are bringing in the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship and Ministry of Agriculture to talk about drought planning and how we support agriculture through times where we clearly do not have enough water or at times when we have too much water, kind of building on that question. But we're not looking to change the ALR in response to that. We do know that cherries and other crops in the Okanagan are being grown at elevations they've never been grown before and not necessarily captured in the ALR. But those are really specialty crops, and in some cases, the fact that that land isn't in the ALR, you know, doesn't mean that maybe it needs to be. There's land outside the ALR that is farmed, and so we aren't reacting to climate change with a response that involves changing land base, but we are wanting to be part of a conversation about how we make sure people can produce in BC going forward, knowing that we are living in a new time. We can't look to the past to forecast weather. We're living and experiencing it as it arrives. And agriculture, we need agriculture. We need food security in BC. So, you know, we're trying to work with those agencies that have a role and involvement in that so that we can better support and encourage farming with what little land we do have.
Thank you. And just, I know we are having some sound quality issues in here. Apparently they are not having them elsewhere. So if you were to go somewhere else and listen in on your computer, you would not be having the issues. We're not quite sure what's wrong, but the entire session will be available to be viewed afterwards for anyone who wants to go back. The sound quality should be much better there. So if you missed anything about the presentation, you'll be able to go back and view it in your own time. We have Director O'Reilly and then Director Sarai.
Thank you for the presentation, Mike O'Reilly from City of Kamloops. I guess a couple things, but the slides and the pictures that you're showing is beautiful agricultural land. But I really question a lot of the land that isn't beautiful agricultural land that's in the ALR specifically. And I guess I'm wondering how the ALR overlays with so many of the different things and issues that we have as a province. And we heard last week, or even actually this week, the BC Builds Plan, the housing crisis. I haven't heard of an agricultural crisis at this point, but I'm wondering how this overlays. And I think the last comment, and I'm not sure who it was, I can't see the names from here, but saying that, you know, you're not looking at making changes to the boundaries based on climate change. And I think yours may be the only agency that I have heard that isn't making big changes to how they operate due to climate change that we know is coming. And while I respect the NOI process and I think it's great, would it not be incumbent on the ALR for you guys to be the ones to look at those boundaries and things where the boundaries can be moved and remove pieces out that probably or maybe should not be in the ALR, and how that can fit in with every other overlaying plan that the provincial government has, municipalities have, and regional districts have. And then I guess my question, so that was first question. And second question, you put the applications that you've received was one of the slides. I wonder how many applications were approved versus the applications that were received. Thank you.
Sure. I'll start with the last one because it's just a bit of a quick, snappy response. Our annual report gives you the stats on the percent of applications that are approved in each application type. So like, for example, I know that 68% of the additional residence requests were approved. So I can't roll that up for you right here at the moment. But if you look at our annual reports, we give you the percentage approved. It's certainly much higher than you hear in terms of, you know, 78% of non-farm use. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. You can see every stat in terms of our approval ratings, and you can see approvals by region, and all of that data is there, as well as the inclusion and exclusions from the ALR by regional district. And you can see the applications submitted by local governments. So we do have a lot of information available in the annual report. So I would direct you there. Sorry, I don't have all those numbers off the top of my head. And you know, the ALR, in terms of its establishment, didn't just include class 1 to 3. It also included class 4 to 6, and in some cases class 7, where, you know, the continuous landscape base was required in order to support farming and not necessarily have small pockets of land that, you know, might open up or impact surrounding agricultural land. So not all agricultural land is created equal. And in some cases, you know, agriculture innovation is not entirely reliant on soil-based conditions. We have seen agriculture change, in particular the introduction of vertical farming, which is wholly enclosed agriculture within buildings. So BC's signal has been that, you know, you need a land base in order to preserve food security for the future. But how agriculture is produced, you know, you can appreciate farming is innovative in itself, and it's an economic engine, and the industry works well. With respect to an agricultural crisis, I mean, in some parts of the province, I would suggest there is a bit of a crisis tied to climate change. If you look at what's happening with tree fruits in particular, and if you looked at some of the wildfire impacts on the industry and what that might mean to their ability to recover. So agriculture is very much stressed as an industry, as many other areas are. You know, if you want to talk about housing and supply, I mean, I think I've said it, BC is mountainous, and we're not making any more land, and there's a government priority. We're just the agency that administers it. The ALR was actually established by the Soils branch of the BC government in consultation with the ALR. And we do look at boundaries, but we really only do that at a community level with community support. If my chair was here, she would have referred to a review in Kootenays that politically there was a lot of interest in. And in actual fact, property owners were vehemently opposed, in particular small lot agriculture or small lot removal in the ALR, because it does come with some tax breaks. And so I think government and the commission has taken surprise by those that wanted out that, you know, there wasn't an argument to, given the size and scale and economies of agriculture could support, and that small lots in many cases wanted to stay in, even though on the surface maybe wouldn't be encouraging the kind of economies of scale of farming. If local governments, either the TNRD itself or other communities, want to talk about what the ALR looks like where they are, we're happy to be part of more of a community-led process. But the climate data is still there. We've asked the provincial government to take a look at whether or not the Canadian land inventory and the BC land inventory could be updated to reflect changes in climate, but we ourselves are not the ones that change the biophysical parameters. We'd still be stuck working with the same inventory, but we are very interested on whether that biophysical data could be updated to take a look at climate, because some areas are becoming more attractive to agriculture. And we see ourselves as an agency that's part of that collective dialogue, not always the one. So I can appreciate housing supply. I mean, our legislation allows in some cases what they're encouraging to happen in the urban areas in terms of 3 units per lot. But in our engagement with the Ministry of Housing, the message wasn't at the expense of the ALR. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Director Sarai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that presentation. I have a couple of questions. Just piggybacking that last comment you just said, that if the municipality or the community supports it, is that threshold looked at differently if a municipality puts in, or a district, a regional district supports an OCP that includes agricultural land that is non-producing and is borderline to build more houses that were desperately needed? So if it's including an OCP in these regional districts or a municipality, is that threshold different than just an individual coming in trying to apply for land to come out?
Sure, thank you for the question. The legislation's actually been changed, so individual property owners can no longer request exclusion from the ALR. And the government's press release at the time was encouraging an approach that involved local government consideration. Official community plans under our statute are envisioned as being consistent with the ALR. So when we talk about planning, we usually talk about planning for agriculture as opposed to land use change. A local government has to forward an official community plan or regional growth strategy to the Commission for comment, which is where we would get engaged in discussions about proposal to redesignate ALR as something other than agriculture, and have a process of working with staff at local governments to talk about what that means. Not to say that that doesn't mean there aren't changes. It was like 4 years ago, we worked with Caribou Regional District on a review of some of the areas they wanted to engage the commission with. And as part of site visits and analysis of physical data, there were some areas that the commission agreed could be removed, but then there were other areas the commission wasn't prepared to consider. So, you know, it's a planning exercise that if you want us involved at the front end, we're always interested to be part of these discussions for sure.
Thank you. I just have one supplemental. One of the issues that's come up in our areas, some land from ALR was released almost 25 years ago. And basically nothing's happened on that piece of land in 25 years. And it doesn't look like the owner has any intention of doing it. But what I've heard is that's being used against our municipality if we want to apply for any more land to be released for housing, is that was approved 25 years ago. So we have surplus land that's been released, but it's not being initiated to build on. So I'm just wondering, how, is there a timeline when you release land for certain areas for development? Is there an opportunity to put a timeline that something has to be done, whether in a short period of time, number of houses per year or per 5 years? It's detrimental to our district and our municipality for land to be released and nothing ever happens to it. But then when we want to move forward on something else, we get penalized for that land that was released 20 years ago.
Thank you for that question. Having worked in local government, I can appreciate that. The last community came from had a piece of property approved for exclusion in 1986, and people still reside there and have no interest in developing it. Once land is excluded from the ALR, the commission has no jurisdiction over it. So the challenge would be is we as an agency, if the land is actually removed from the ALR, wouldn't be able to use any levers and tools to bring about a change. So, you know, I guess if we wanted to talk about particular scenarios where one might try to be innovative, you know, I don't think I've ever seen us. We sometimes have conditions that if you don't comply with them by a particular time in terms of achieving an outcome, that decision times out. Commission is much tighter in terms of the time horizons they provide for compliance. So it is possible that if someone was approved for exclusion, I'm just using a hypothetical scenario, and there were some requirements, various conditions the commission had to be done in a particular time frame, and those weren't met, then the land wouldn't be excluded. But it's really hard for us to try to lever someone once land is excluded because it's not our jurisdiction. But yeah, I can appreciate that as a challenge.
Thank you. Director Stamer, you were lurking, but we can now see you and we see that your hand is up. So it is your turn, sir.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll try to be as quick as I can with a couple of questions. Thanks very much for your presentation. I look forward to reviewing it again online. We haven't had any issues online seeing it and hearing it, but it was very good information. First off, I know it's early in discussion, but unfortunately, the provincial government is looking at changing the Land Use Act, and submissions only allowed till March 31st of this year. Do you see anything in the available information of the changes that could negatively impact the ALC and the ALR land, specifically the processes through the applications going forward?
Thanks for that question. We received the press release about the changes to the Land Act, probably at the exact same time you did, and we're unaware that there were changes being contemplated. We have reached out through our host Ministry of Agriculture to try to learn more about what is being contemplated. I think, you know, probably the easiest comment to make, and as I noted in the slide, that 54% of the ALR is in unsurveyed crown, which means discussions that might touch on that 50% of the ALR would have a significant implication on, you know, the land available. I think I understand from what I'm being told that this is a change to the Act to allow for the negotiation of agreements around shared decision-making, which we're unclear how we would be involved or if we would be involved. So yeah, I mean, when half of the land base is in an unsurveyed crown type of scenario, then, you know, these conversations are important. But our legislation is also one of the first pieces of legislation identified as a priority for the Ministry of Agriculture to bring into alignment with DRIPA, and government has been consulting on what that may or may not look like. So we also sit back and wait for an opportunity to engage through that process as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And second of all, can you still exchange existing non-ALR land with trading with existing ALR land? Is that still allowed? And further to Director O'Reilly and Sarai's comments about, you know, some of the housing crises, there's still land out there that is not ALR land that could be identifiable as ALR land. Is that still a process where you can actually do that, where you can actually trade ALR land with non-ALR land if it meets the specifications?
Sure, thanks. Our statute has never provided for what we call that term a swap. The statute has never provided for that. But not to say that there isn't an opportunity. It just has to be two separate applications because the exclusion process is much different than the inclusion process. And there have been, I would suggest in my time here at the Commission, 2 proposals that likely meet the criteria that you're talking about in terms of one being put forward knowing there was a request for the other. And the board had to put their mind to whether or not the inclusion was worthy, for lack of a better term, of inclusion based on its individual merits, and had to put its mind to whether or not exclusion of the land requested met the test. And depending on the physical attributes of the property, it's possible, but it wouldn't be like the sole reason for initiating that exclusion wouldn't be because there hasn't been a loss. Our statute now says they have to protect and enhance in every decision they make the size, integrity, and continuity of the ALR. So they really have to put their mind to that now based on the statute. But it is possible for people to make 2 applications and speak to them collectively. It has been done. That doesn't mean the land has actually been swapped.
Understood. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Director Hamer-Jackson.
Yeah, I just like to say, one thing I think we got to remember, you guys, I think you're doing a great job. You know, the provincial government's predicted, in the next 8 years, another 1 million people, coming to the province of British Columbia. And we can talk about housing and all that, but with that's going to come a lot more people, obviously. And it must be a tough job when, farmland and food security is going to be a huge impact. Because if we don't have farmland and food security, that's not going to be good. So thanks for the work.
Thank you. Just a question. I know from firsthand experience that it can be a very lengthy process to go to the ALC. In Ashcroft, we were assured that our request was a very simple one and it took 3 years from start to finish. Are there any plans to do anything to streamline this process so that you're not waiting 3 years plus for what's described as a very simple application?
I can't comment on the time frame around your particular scenario. The Commission rarely takes that long to make an application. We have a target of 90 business days once we receive the application, provided we have all the information. I mean, really the biggest determining factor on processing time is the resources we have to deliver that work. So, you know, we are reliant on our funding from the provincial government. Our allocations remain very steady, and yet pressure to process and move things faster is never ending. But our ability to do that is largely hampered by resources. Really, under the statute, is no way to streamline process any further. The commissioners still must put their mind to the merit of the case and evidence and facts. Hopefully that application wasn't a very current one that you're describing, but yeah, resources, as you can imagine, have a big influence on our ability to deal with work that comes through the door.
And just as a supplemental, as a regional district with a lot of rural area, I can only see that requests for additional dwellings are going to increase, particularly with the province's push for more housing, and as farmers and ranchers age out and want younger family members to come and live with them, is there anything that the TNRD can do as a regional district to put pressure on the province to increase the funding to streamline the applications that are coming in?
I mean, certainly. You know, I'm happy to chat about that. I mean, you do have a very strong voice at UBCM, and you know, we do work to try to respond and service your citizens as well as the citizens of BC, and you know, are doing the best we can to do that with the limited tools available to us. So yeah, the voice of local government, you know, support is appreciated.
Thank you. Any more, Mr. Krause?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank Kim and Katrina and Lindsay for taking up our invitation to speak today and speak directly to the board. I think it's great that we hear from the ALC directly, and it's not just Development Services staff interpreting their regulations and explaining it to the board. But I did want to summarize something that I think is really important, because I'm not sure if it quite landed hard enough. The message now is that if a property owner is in the ALR and they're building an accessory building, we can't issue the building permit until that owner has gone through this NOI process. So it's adding an additional step. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, because that's not something that the board sees, but our staff certainly see it at the front counter, and we're certainly taking a lot of criticism for that, and the frontline staff are having to manage that. So I just wanted to make sure that's acknowledged here. Again, not saying it's right or wrong, simply that we're taking it at the front counter, and you know, it's important work that's being done. But what we can't forget is that there's a lot of properties in the ALR, like Pritchard, Green Lake, Cherry Creek, where people have bought those properties, perhaps not realizing it's in the ALR, or perhaps thinking that there's no consequences for being in the ALR. So they've bought their dream property, they're looking to build a 3-car garage, and they're having to go through this process now. So it's something new for them. And so our residents, some of them are quite surprised by it. And so the negative reactions are happening at the counter. So I just want to make sure that the board is aware of that. And in case your residents call you, especially as electoral area directors, you'll be calling me asking why the permit hasn't been issued. I'll be referring back to this presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further questions for any of our speakers? No? All right, well, thank you very much again for coming along. I hope you're having as beautiful a Friday as it is here in Kamloops, and enjoy your family day-long weekend.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
All right, and we have no further business. So on this beautiful Family Day weekend, we are adjourned, and have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, Madam Chair.